Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Swedenborgian Life. It's time for our very special panel show. So I got the very special panel with me. You may know them already. This is Cara Dom, Latin consultant for the New Century Edition. Oh, I didn't even mention myself. They're forcing me from the booth to mention myself. I'm Curtis, and I'm the host of Swedenborgian Life, so I'm going to host this one just because what else would I do? And this is Cara Dom, Latin consultant, New Century Edition translation of Swedenborg's works. And if we flip cameras, you'll see we have over there Dr. Jonathan Rose, who's a series editor of that very same New Century Edition, which is a new translation of Swedenborg's stuff. And then we have Chelsea, who is writing on the show along with me. Thanks everybody for coming. What we're going to do today, if you guys haven't played the game, it's exactly what you think it would be. Get your questions in as you're watching. We're going to try to answer as many as we can to the best of our ability. And we're going to see what happens. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks everybody out there for coming. Let's do it. Hey, what's the worst that could happen? Let's try it out. All right, so this is our first one. This is from Brenda. How significant is the Blessed Mother to Swedenborgian thought? A question from the Cincinnati Watch group. Ooh. Trying to learn if people who had significant roles in the Lord's life here are still doing important things in heaven. Before we jump into that meaty question, look at that question from the Cincinnati Watch group, and what that means is...
What is a watch group,
Curtis? What is Cincinnati? Well, Cincinnati is a city, it's in Ohio, and there's a group of people there watching this show. So thank you guys for watching, and we are going to get your question answered, or we're going to try. I don't want to make any promises. So let's talk about it. How significant? So what's the Blessed Mother? I'm taking that as a reference to Mary, the mother of Jesus. So yeah, Swedenborg talks a lot about Jesus. How does Mary factor in there? And how's her role now? How's she doing? So does Swedenborg have commentary on it? Does anyone want to start us off on that one?
Well, I'll just jump in and give a little easy answer.
Yes.
That is, she's trying to learn, or he is trying to learn, if people who had significant roles in the Lord's life here are still doing important things in heaven. And I would say yes. Like, that is one thing that, the human community that the Lord was born into were all humans like any of us.
Yeah.
That had their lives and then passed on to the next world and are having a life in the spiritual world, which I guess is distinctly different from this idea that Mary was somehow different than other humans in some way.
Metaphysically.
So I'll let somebody else take it from there, but there is sort of a...
Well, then I just want to tag on to that, because Swedenborg seems to have this sort of dual explanation of, in some ways, who you are in this world doesn't matter at all, because he'll talk about people who are in great positions of power, but on the other side they're nobody because they didn't have love, so they attract to themselves these squalid sort of conditions. But on the other hand, he'll say like, I wanted to go see Plato or Socrates, and they're still doing the same thing. They got their disciples, and people are still seeking them out. So it seems like sometimes it carries over, and sometimes it doesn't.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Mary herself, Swedenborg does see her, right? In the other world, he says, I saw Mary, and his commentary on her in that passage is brief. He just says, she says that she seems a good person, she's in heaven, and she doesn't want anyone to think of her as, I'm the mother of God. She thinks, God, Jesus is my Lord as well, and everybody just be good to each other. That's essentially it, right? Am I getting that right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. It's an interesting sort of situation, because in Scripture, Mary's goodness is described at some length, her Magnificat and so on. Right. Her goodness is an important feature. To Swedenborg, the main thing that she contributed to the mix was humanness. I mean, that's how Jesus became had a divine soul and also had a human manifestation kind of thing. And so Swedenborg doesn't have the same view at all that Mary needs to be sin-free to get this thing to work. That Jesus was born without sin. Actually, an important thing from Swedenborg's standpoint was that Jesus was born with hereditary evil, not necessarily from Mary. Who knows? She seems like a very good person and needed to be a good person, but just passed down through the generations. Swedenborg says that's where it's not. There's not an original sin. It's not the Adam and Eve and the apple kind of thing. Yeah. It's just something that's passed down from parents to children, and so Jesus would have inherited that through Mary, because that was his human connection kind of thing. Getting off of Mary for a second, the 12 apostles play a very significant role early in Swedenborg's writings, he's saying, oh, there's just symbolic. Don't think they're going to be sitting on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel.
You mean so
that
the
sort of
people
thing.
themselves are just those characters in the story are just symbolizing something about the human mind, about spirituality. So
That's
don't
right.
think about those 12 guys as important.
That's right. That's
Got it.
right. It's not that St. Peter's going to greet you at the gate
That's
and
right.
tell you whether you can go in or not. He means faith, and that's why those stories involve Peter. But then he surprises you in his last published theological work, True Christianity, where he suddenly says toward the end there that the Lord is sending out those same 12 disciples who followed him in the world to proclaim his coming.
Right.
And I thought a lot about that. It seems like the eyewitness factor was very important. That there were people who were there. This comes up also in Swedenborg's work on Other Planets, where there were people from this world who were alive when Jesus was alive, and they could say, yes, that's him. So that eyewitness. If you look at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, it talks about I've heard this from people who were witnesses to these things, and at the end of Luke, the Lord says to his disciples that they should be witnesses of these things, and so the eyewitness factor is important. So anyway, it's kind of a mixed picture, but it's not the sort of traditional view of Mary. But I think she is a wonderful image of goodness, as is Elizabeth and some other characters in the New Testament.
Yeah, it's interesting to just think a little bit tangentially about how the apostles, you might think, oh, they're such special people because they get to they have this special role in the spiritual world, according to Swedenborg, but that it comes down to they have a very particular use, and that would be true of each of us, and that Swedenborg, like you're saying, yes, they were these eyewitnesses to Jesus, so they have a particular role that they can serve in heaven, but, like any angel, you would hope, they would say something like, it's not me, I'm just doing, whatever, living out my use. So that's just something that is true to everybody, that we have a particular...
Like a higher order of being or something.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, I had a coughing attack while you were saying that, and then it looked back at me like, "Okay, host, we're going to," and I was like, I will say, being an important something in the Bible doesn't guarantee you a good, because I'm not going to name any names, but he does mention very important biblical figures that he says have not done well in the afterlife because they were symbolic of what was going on, but they were not, they didn't actually have this love in their hearts that they seem to have.
So
the same free choice thing applies. I was also thinking about the fact that he says that when people in this world loved science or literature or whatever, if they're at all heavenly or they have anything good in them, they continue that love. So it seems like if you're good, you get to continue. If you're bad, then you forget all about who you were. Because
you would use it to harm others. It's sort of like a safety, and not only harm others, but further damage yourself. So it's like, oop, no, can't play with that. There's gonna be a problem.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
nice.
We could talk about that for a long time, but I feel like we already talked about it for a long time. Let's cut our losses. Do you want to say anything, Cara?
I just want to say that what Jonathan was saying about her being the access that Jesus had to humanity. I mean, that's such a core part of Swedenborgian theology. Is that that is what enabled hell to have access to Jesus, and then he had to clean him up because they could get at him because he had the whole human,
frailty kind of.
Yeah, right.
Just
so she's very important, but it's different than how. It's not so much an individual thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In Swedenborg, it's like God is cool, and the rest of us are all the same.
Right.
It's not like there are higher. Even though some people accomplish wonderful things, this is all God coming through. So Mary was playing a role, but really, end of the day, paycheck goes to.
That's right.
All right, let's look at our next one. Let's see what we can get. Thanks so much for the question, Mary. What does Emanuel Swedenborg say the church means? Is it a movement or is it inside each one of us?
All together now?
Both.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. The answer is yes, and also yes. So let's talk about the church. I mean, it's a good one to talk about because you're going to crack open any of these books, maybe even especially True Christianity, which you mentioned, which I think you might have translated as well. You're going to see church all over that. He's talking about church. And church is having an image problem these days with some people. And is that what he's talking about? So what does he mean when he says church? Please answer.
Shall I?
Yeah, please.
One thing that he doesn't mean that the word means in English is a building. So in English, we use church like, oh, there's a church. Oh, there's another one.
Right.
He's not talking about that.
Right.
He uses the term, I think I studied about 5 different ways that he uses it. Sometimes it's a really huge term for a whole religious epoch, and he says there are 5 of them in the world, and this relates to Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the golden and the silver and so on,
And to our show, The Spiritual History of the Human Race.
Yes, there you go.
Okay.
And so he'll describe it as a whole era of a certain religious approach. Like ancient Judaism, he'll call a church, even though that term usually is used of Christianity and not, you use a different term for Judaism.
Yeah.
But he'll use it of Judaism very freely, and of churches that went before that, because that was the primary religious approach at that time, as far as he was concerned, characterized by animal sacrifice and rituals and so on. And then you had a different thing when Christianity came in, where it's more about the sermon in church and repentance and so on.
Yeah.
And so these are religious eras. Then he'll also use it to mean all of Christianity as a whole. And then sometimes he uses it just to mean the Protestant part of Christianity, excluding Catholicism. Other times Catholicism is included. And then he'll narrow it all the way down to, certain sort of denominations within Christianity, and then get all the way down to where it's his go-to definition is something that's inside each of us. And you have to have the church in you to be a church. And just being born in the church doesn't mean you are a church. There's some spiritual growth you have to go through to be a church. So it's both a movement, but it's absolutely dependent on the spiritual. He also talks about an internal church and an external church. The external church is the organization that you see. The internal church is more important, which is who is really following this thing. And people in all different religions can be following it.
Well, I think there we go. So it's like, this is why we need these questions asked, because what does Swedenborg say about church? 10 minutes later.
Right.
And those are, we haven't covered everything, but these are some.
Right.
Oh, I was just going to say I have a little bit of like a, not counter argument, but just like
a rebuttal. Good. We haven't had a rebuttal on the show, have we?
By crossing it off that it's not a building, and yet a church, you couldn't think of it as a spiritual church building, because in terms of what Swedenborg says, a building is sort of the doctrine, the ideas, and then what fills the building is then the love part of it. So if the building that you have, if you're the structures that you use to build your mind, so in a way we each do have a church because it's the building of our mind, right? And so the ideas that you have give shape to the love, or can be containers for the love that can come in. And so you might have a similarly shaped church building in your mind as somebody else, and so yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
And the word, by the way, that Swedenborg uses
is taller though.
for a church building is temple. Like often in the translations, the word temple is what he means by a church building.
Nice.
So it took me a long time to figure out it never means the building.
Oh, I had another thought.
Yes.
But Swedenborg talks about our I can't remember if I made this up or if I read this in Swedenborg.
Hey, listen, we just put them both out there side by side. I mean, Swedenborg said this.
That's what you guys are here for. Is be like,
it's all good.
Don't listen.
It's all good.
But
cut the feed.
Yeah. That we each our religion is sort of based on our idea of God, and we're all unique. So you could almost say that we each are our own religion. Is that sort of what he said? Like an individual
certainly
basically has your own individual religion, because your religion is really how you are relating to God, what those ideas are, what that love is. That's like your thing. And so just like how we're used to, people might think it's weird to say, wait, a church is inside each one of us? Well, actually, you're your own religion too. So,
right. Church in least form. As he says, the angels are a heaven in least form. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
I think you're okay on that.
All right, thank you.
All right, do you have any church thoughts?
I think they covered my thoughts.
So, as I understand it, the smallest the atom of church, like the smallest form that still retains its characteristics, is this thing in the heart and mind. And it's like the joining of goodness and truth there. It's what the Lord is striving to build in all of us. And you can put a bunch of those together, and then you get this sort of larger church. And he talks about people being in the same church, even if they have different external religion, because they have similar love and faith. And then he talks about everybody's in the Lord's church who lives rightly by what they believe. So there's just layers on layers on layers, but when you go into Swedenborg, he just says church, and he means it in all these different ways.
Yeah,
so it's very easy to get confused.
Yeah.
Now that we've said all this, no one will get confused.
Yeah, that's right. That day is over.
All right, let's go to the next one. This is from Brenda, 9361. You've mentioned some people marry in heaven, so is there physical contact? Okay, yes, I mean sex, laughing out loud. Cut the feed. 2, and are only married people allowed to indulge? Okay.
Great question.
So, yeah, let's get our ratings up. Let's talk about sex. And does anyone want to start it off?
I think he talks about sex and marriage.
Yes.
And sex and marriage. That's what I'm aware of.
Yes. We're talking
heaven.
Specifically about heaven.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, he says this very interesting thing that the rules are different in heaven than they are in hell. So in heaven, adultery is against the law, and so there's a monogamy and, whatever form that takes. And there's absolutely physical contact. There were people that Wesley, the founder of Methodism, was very critical of Swedenborg because he even said that there was sex in hell, and he said, "Well, how can you keep people out of hell? What's the disincentive? I don't get it." And so they were upset with him for teaching what he was teaching. But in hell, they have sort of relationships, and they kind of sort of a hookup culture or something. But you're changing partners, kind of, and that's okay in hell. It's a different sort of law, whereas in heaven that doesn't fly. Right. And Swedenborg describes the to as much as you can in ancient Latin, but he describes the sexual experiences in heaven. It sounds like they're just glorious. Just amazing how your whole sort of spiritual body is kind of alive with these wonderful feelings, and it gets better and better over time, kind of thing. So,
well, that's one of the things that is there physical contact, and what we think of as physical contact, sort of. Yes, but Swedenborg says that really we each have a spiritual body, if this is something that this person doesn't already know, and our spiritual body is in the form of a human being and has spiritual senses, but the spiritual element is because that the correspondence is just what is, right? So like you have your body because of what it's meaning,
the shape of your mind, or something, right?
It is the shape of your mind, and so our spiritual senses are more, well, at least in heaven, I guess he does say, are like the more open you are to love and wisdom, the stronger your senses are in the spiritual world. Mm-hmm. And so it's not physical contact, but by calling it physical sense contact is actually something more incredible than what our physical experience is. Yeah,
he says, doesn't he say at some point that the pleasures there compared to physical contact is like a pure and gentle breeze compared with a coarse and stinging dust or something. Yes,
I say that because we did a little video that was an animated illustration of that. It's on this channel.
That's right
now.
That's right. So actually there's better sex there than here.
And the physical, what we would call physical contact, there's spiritual contact, but it's like the same sort of experience. Meaning,
it feels exactly the same.
You're like, there's objects and people can high five and whatever, and you feel so that's there. And the way that he talks about how people behave with sex in heaven and hell, it's tied into this larger narrative of the way that human relationships are. And he talks about this pairing in heaven, this monogamous pairing, as being central to the happiness of the people who are there, and central to the experience of heaven. And it's this reflection of the union of the good and the true that we were talking about, reflection of the union of God with humanity, and that this is like a core bedrock principle in the happiness, and that hell is like about using people for momentary pleasure. Right. It's not really a satisfying life, but they are allowed to engage in it because hell is not a punishment. It's about giving people the most happiness they can have with a lifestyle that they
Right.
chose. Right.
Right.
And provided they don't cross certain
Kept within
boundaries,
order.
or
right.
something like that. So
Yep.
there's restrictions on it and rules there, but there's
That's right.
different rules than in heaven.
Yep. Because you're not allowed to further harm people or that kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
So
Right.
that's, and as far as are only married people allowed to indulge, heaven, it's not like you be in heaven and like, oh man, I know next year I'm going to meet the right person. You know, like that this is the meeting of a partner is something that happens, and nobody's kept out like, oh, I wish I could have sex, but I can't find anybody. You know, like that everybody finds someone, and you find like
Right.
the person that you're truly compatible with. So
Right.
And he does say, right, that like there are people who choose not to marry, and yet they're still in heaven.
Right.
oh right.
And I don't
People
know,
are devoted to celibacy for religious reasons or
Yeah.
whatever kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
So it's-
that is on
yeah.
the menu.
like that's a part of who they
Right.
want to
And what
be.
are we talking about as heaven? Because he talks about multiple layers, and he said on the first layer, there's celibacy.
Isn't there even
he
polygamy?
talks about polygamy and
Polygamy
like for
even,
people who
yeah.
believe it's part of their religion. He says it's very like broad, inclusive. But I think
Yeah.
the farther up you go, the more the more you're conforming to. I don't want to use the word
Yeah.
conforming, but
Right, because it's sense
You reflect it.
self-led, you know, like it's not like,
Yeah.
now that I'm getting upgraded to the next level, I won't be able to
That's
whatever
right.
sleep around. It's like you want to only be with this one person, and
Right.
and as you're opening yourself up to who God is, like one of the things you said the marriage of the good and the true, but I like to think of it as, I like the words love and wisdom, of just that is Swedenborg talks about how I can't even understand it. I often wonder about this, but he says that there's like one love with one
With,
truth.
yeah,
Like
they
there's
go
this
together,
because
right.
God is one, and it's these two things coming together that is God, the marriage of love and wisdom, so that there is this like inherent monogamy to the whole principle of how love and wisdom interact with each other.
Yeah, I was
Right.
recently reading. Swedenborg gives this account of meeting a couple of angels who had died when they were little kids or babies in this world, and so it had no exposure to lust or exposure
Right.
to that. And he's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm talking to people who don't even know what it is. And they were saying like, how could you possibly be attracted to someone who's not attracted to you in the same way and who isn't giving this love of this commitment to each other? They were just how could you even find that pleasurable? And to them it wasn't even a thing. Whereas anybody who's had a human life, you know, like, oh wait, of course you would be interested in all kinds of people. But so it all depends on, you know, what your life experience has been and where you are. And we'd say, what do people do in heaven? And heaven is, you're talking about million, trillion, billion people. And I'm sure that like even the slice Swedenborg described, we get there, it's bigger and broader than
Right.
anything that we know. So yeah, but there are probably principles that apply as you're moving higher. Okay, man, that's pretty good. Anything further? Let's go. Let's do the next one. Max Borg. Hey, maybe related to Swedenborg. Do angels speak in something like tongues?
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay,
No,
so
it's
you guys
related.
can answer us on this
This is
one.
the whole like answer in a question.
Yeah.
The whole idea of speaking in tongues comes from the story.
The act in the acts.
Right.
I think.
Well, it comes up a number of times in
Oh, it does
Acts
come-
and Epistles, yeah.
It comes up a number of times. Okay, it's not
No.
just the.
No, it's not just the
There's
Day of
one-
Pentecost, but there's
Yeah, that's the name.
talks
Day of
about the
Pentecost.
gifts and stuff like that, right?
Okay, so I just love some context of like what does the biblical sense of speaking in tongues really mean? Because when I like
Yeah.
reading the Pentecost, wasn't. See, I'm showing my ignorance. But
We'll edit
like,
this part out.
isn't this story like that they had all different languages, but then the speaking in tongues was like they were able to be of one language, or they understood each other, or something.
People from
Or am
all
I-
over the world could understand them. They were all gathered there for the
Right.
Feast of the Pentecost from all different kinds of language, thousands of people, and they could all understand what was being said in their own language.
Right. So it does make me think of what Swedenborg says of angelic language, that it is a language that we can all understand.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
So is that what they were originally thinking?
right.
Maybe communicating in somehow, even though. Yeah. So I don't know, but like popularly, what we think of speaking in tongues
Sure.
is a little bit weirder than that, or something.
There's also other passages in the epistles that talk about the importance. If they're speaking in tongues, then you also need to have someone interpret it. so that people can understand. Like it doesn't do much good
Okay.
to
Right.
be speaking in tongues and have nobody understand what you're saying. The idea is it's supposed to be edifying and so on. So in some ways that you can see that is like angelic language coming down to that world, that day of Pentecost event, that everybody understands it similarly. In another way, the tongues thing would kind of go away in the other world because there's this universal language of thought and communication and affection. You can
Right.
just see from people's facial expressions, and from far away you can tell what they're thinking, and there's a universal language that's shared by everybody, and nobody needs to learn it. You know it as soon as you
Right.
get there. So angels do speak in words, and I'm fascinated that they also write, and there are things that angels can write that they can't say, which is very interesting. But the whole bandwidth...
Volcanic laconiosis, or whatever that word is. Right, sorry.
Who's speaking in tongues now? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're really digging a hole there today.
No, I think we're going to pull this one out.
Okay, good. The communication, Swedenborg has a chapter in Heaven and Hell on the language of angels, and the bandwidth, there's a language of thunder, and there's all these different kinds of languages. So the communication bandwidth, I really look forward to going to the other world because I think the communication is going to be so much richer. The only downside is that people will be able to see what I'm thinking. So that'll be too bad. But
pros and cons.
But
Bad for you,
learning what
fun
other
for the
people
rest
are
of
thinking will be awesome. So
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Language thoughts?
No, he says you don't have to learn it. You just know it. You know it.
And doesn't he say that you know it because it's the language of the concepts that are behind words? That we all, like, if I'm trying to talk to somebody that knows Spanish and I'm trying to communicate, dignity. We know what dignity is as a thing. We've attached this word to it, but probably the picture of it in my mind is the same as the picture of it in their mind. That angelic language is somehow hooked into that. That's why Swedenborg says when an angel talks to you, it falls into your own language, but they're actually pressing the buttons like up the waterfall, but it's going through there.
But also in the spiritual language, or as I understand it, is that it's not so much that like you and I might both have a sense of dignity or like what that means as its own thing, but like an angel, when they talk to somebody, they can see their whole life and personality in their face. And so if one particular individual is saying dignity, then that angel is able to see all the nuances of what that word means for that person, in a moment.
Right. That's right. And I've just been editing some material in Swedenborg's works that talks about how angels and even people, the earliest people on this planet, spoke in what I would call faces and eyes.
Yeah.
It's not speaking in tongues. It's that your whole face is hardwired to convey an eyes. I think people are paying more attention to this in acting lately, where the eyes are so... Even the animations are getting the eyes so expressive, you know what I mean? That where being able to communicate with your face and your eyes. So there's just a lot of bandwidth.
The earliest people would actually do a lot of their communicating through little movements of the lips and the eyes.
And the eyes, that's right. Facial expression showing the thoughts and feelings. And it was pre-verbal. There weren't words. Swedenborg explains why it takes a while for words to develop, because you have to agree on a meaning and how do you use it, and it's just so where human beings tend to start is just with facial, and you see that in little babies. They don't have another way to but you can see sometimes what they're going through from their faces.
They're cute. Okay, does that feel good? All right, let's not go to the next question. We're gonna watch a movie. We had a fan video submitted that we thought we could watch here and then just give thoughts on and all that kind of stuff. So we really appreciate you sending it in. So if that's cool with you guys running the tech, we're going to go watch the video now.
Hi Swedenborgians. This is a quick video that I'm making. It's on my own spiritual awakening and my own experiences with Swedenborg. So I just wanted to say how instrumental Swedenborg has been in my own regeneration, and I wanted to share what I've experienced. It started about 8 years ago when I was 21. Now, I don't know if there's a spiritual significance in the number 21 with, 7 by 3. See the show on the numbers. I had an experience where I saw the light, literally. I saw a tunnel with angels, and I guess that could be a correspondence of, understanding that God exists. And for me, that was just a really crazy period, because I never thought God could exist. I was the most anti-God there was. I was like Saul in the Old Testament, going against God, like, rah, 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 they're, killing Christians. I mean, I wasn't killing Christians, but I was that far gone that I would have been lost if God hadn't intervened. I came to the realization that God exists. It was a time of great spiritual struggle. On earth, it was what they would call a psychosis, but to me, it was a near-death experience. I wasn't near death. But either way, it was a long struggle for the next 8 years, up until a couple of weeks ago, when I started reading more Swedenborg, and I actually read the book by E. Kent Rogers, The 12 Miracles of Spiritual Growth, and that has just been so instrumental in me coming to a lot of realizations. For those of you who don't know, you can actually download it at swedenborg.com. It's a book about how the New Testament shows that the miracles Jesus did actually correspond to the things that we go through in our own struggles. I've always struggled with many addictions. I've been addicted to food. I've been addicted to pornography. And the more you get these things out into the light, the more Jesus helps you to shine heaven's light on the things that you've done, the guilt that you feel, the weight of your sin. You let it go, and it's just so great. So I highly recommend that book. I'm on like chapter 6, but I've already just come to so many realizations. It's just turning my life around bit by bit, and I'm talking to a lot of people at my church. I would highly recommend talk about your problems. If you have addictions that you're struggling with and you're trying to get rid of them, you cannot do it on your own. So find help, and I just wanted to say thank you all at Swedenborgian Life, and thank you amazing people out there, and keep doing what you're doing, and go for Swedenborg.
All right, so there you go. That was an awesome look into somebody's life and to impact through concept. So I just want to get your guys' reaction to that.
So powerful.
That was awesome.
It was amazing. Yeah, the light and the connection of the light and the truth, like getting honest about things. The same way that light, everybody knows that, if something's funky or moldy or what, just letting light and fresh air into it.
Yeah. I started reading Kent's book. I would be very early on in it, but so I haven't been reading it regularly, but what I read of it was just like really great. So that really was a powerful book, and it's just so cool to hear what somebody's experiences was.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you so much for sending
Thank
that
you
in.
for sharing that.
And that's to me confirmation that it's worth us coming here on Monday and talking about this kind of stuff for an hour, because that's an example of life change, positive life change. That somehow these concepts that we're helping to try to get people aware of are making a difference in happiness for people. So that's awesome.
Amen.
Thank you for sending in that video. All right, let's do more questions. All right, this next one, Zeke. What is the goal of? Oh, an easy one. What is the goal of creation? Why all this?
Zeke.
Here we are.
What?
We're in this thing. Why is there something rather than nothing? And why is it this particular something rather than some nothing? So, what's
First thing that comes to mind
Yeah.
is that, of course, the exact words are leaving my mind, but it's about a heaven from the human race. The purpose of our stay here is to have a heaven made out of the human race. Which is just a real easy thing to say, but what does it all mean?
No, but that's the first thing that came to my mind too. Yep. So what does it mean? What is a heaven for the human race, and how does it justify all this stuff?
Yeah, one aspect of it is that the divine love, the nature of love, is to want to love others outside of itself, to be conjoined with them and to make them blessed and happy forever. And so the divine love wants that to an infinite degree. And so the whole creation of this universe and the spiritual universe was to accommodate this, and a really fundamental linchpin aspect of it all is the freedom. It would be a very different universe if you could somehow do a heaven from the human race without freedom. It'd be a very different deal. But the freedom to have that people have to freely choose heaven. It doesn't work. The divine love is not going to be satisfied by making a whole bunch of robots worship it and bow down or something. That's not what it's looking for. It wants a real living relationship and partnership. And so the freedom thing is what necessitates the existence of hell, you have to have an option. You know, it's not that God created it, but the only way to have a free heaven is to also have a hell, and to have people here in this world where you have some spiritual privacy and you can sort of turn this way and that and decide whether you're in or not. And so a lot of what we go through is for things to come to light, as we were just hearing about in that fan video, so that you can make a choice about it. You can make a choice about something you can see. So a lot of the mayhem and madness that goes on in our world is about making things visible so that people have a choice. So I don't know, how am I doing?
That's the wildest. Yeah, I can take a stab at the words that come to my mind to try to describe it too. It's just wildest, and then what is the goal of creation? So yeah, I think joy is a good answer. Mm-hmm. And I like the quote from, I think it's Swedenborg, maybe it's the Bible. Anyway, but we are because God is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And we, God's thoughts are not our thoughts, and we have a very limited perspective. But as a child of God, I can know that I am because God is, and so then I get to be on this journey of learning about God and learning about myself in God, and I think what God as, in Swedenborgian terms, like love itself and wisdom itself. And then I love Eastern traditions because they really they call it bliss, like Ananda, like this is just love, and wisdom could sound a little bit flat sometimes, but like just this bliss of just existing, and that is that joy, that love that can't help but want to share it with another person. Okay, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here and just say, like, I had a fabulous moment of contemplation of this one time because, and I think it's very Swedenborgian, even though it's sort of like Eastern in its terminology, but there's the dynamic of Shiva and Shakti are very much aligned with this idea of love and wisdom, this divine couple that are God together. But they each have qualities in the Eastern tradition. Like Shiva is very much the like sitting and meditating on a mountaintop. And then Shakti is just this like creating goddess force of power, the power of creation. And they need each other, and they are these qualities of God, or, love and wisdom. And this, or how Swedenborg puts it, is the underlying divine reality and then the capacity to become manifest.
Yeah.
And when you sit still for a while in yourself, like when you get really quiet in meditation, I think we're each able to go in and feel the reality of this in our own beings. Like when you get super quiet in meditation, you're connecting into this like underlying divine reality, like just this constant presence, the steadfastness that is just God itself. But when you're there for a while, like, what do you want to do? You just want to get up and do something, like it just naturally flows into this, all right, that was nice, and now I need to get out there and do something. And that, like, so that dance that's always happening between the stillness and activity and this like love, and then this like wisdom that just wants to, set the world on fire from love. Like that's just that just is. And so I don't spend any time wondering about, well, what was before God? Like that's my own little limited brain thinking, whatever, trying to apply my mind to something that is so much bigger than me. But so that's sort of what comes to my mind when I think about it.
Yeah. And when I hear the phrase, why all this, it makes me think you're probably, when you're wondering why all this, it's not when things are going really well. If I think about the physical world and the way that it's structured and that kind of thing, when I'm in tropical surroundings and I'm snorkeling and I'm seeing all these amazing animals, I'm never like, why all this? I'm like, I'm glad everything's here. This is awesome. But when I just dropped my phone in the toilet and it's like, why all this? And that's like a silly example, but there's just these brutal things that we go through.
Yeah.
So if the Lord's divine providence has for an end heaven from the human race, heaven must make it all worth it. And it must be like God's wants to give us joy, like you're saying. It wants to give us permanent, amazing joy. It has to be that there's a better state reached through all this than without it. And I think Swedenborg does talk a lot about the role of us going through unpleasant things. One part of it is that then you can appreciate what's truly pleasant. I was listening on the radio to one of those cool podcasts, and this guy was talking about gratitude and the importance of gratitude. And he said, I had back surgery a while back, and I couldn't walk. But then I was able to through rehab and that. So now, whenever I'm walking, I'm grateful that I can walk. You're never going to be grateful for walking unless you couldn't have walked. So it has to be, and it still seems brutal because of the things we go through. But if you're thinking about it from a long-term, permanent perspective, everything we go through is loading us up to have this state of not just happiness, like I'm blissed out on, you've pumped me full of God chemical, and I'm feeling, but just like this living, intelligent, profound, wise, like this state. It's like real. Yeah. Like this is real, and now I'm really happy into it. And I think I've used this example before. Once I was I was walking back to my car on the college campus where I was going to school, and I was looking around the parking lot, and I was like, this parking lot's, but I was like, it's peaceful here. Meaning there's no artillery fire, there's no IEDs like this. And I got a little sense of what that means, but if I'd actually lived in a war zone, I would be able to understand that piece. So I guess what I'm saying is it has to be that overall this is a better recipe for happiness, doing it this way. And like whatever heaven is, whatever state of mind that is the ultimate in being glad that you're alive. Whenever people have a near-death experience, once they see the point to it all, they always say, okay, now it's all right. I get it. I get why it all happened. It's okay that it happened. So that it has to be that, or else why would there be all these incredibly painful, frivolous steps in between? It's not like just a science experiment. It's because it wouldn't be worth it somehow. That's the only answer to me that justifies it. It's going to be worth it somehow.
Swedenborg points a couple of times to the image of butterflies and how unexpected, like when you're a caterpillar, you wouldn't necessarily know how your story's going to go because you're all pudgy and crawling around and eating everything in sight, and
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And then, and then you get to the point where you go into this cocoon, and apparently there's no caterpillar anymore. There's just white goo in there.
Which is incredible.
So, when you're in your goo phase, you're sort of thinking, what's happened? I've dissolved into
Things are
nothing.
getting worse.
This is worse than it ever was.
Yeah.
With no idea that you're then going to reform into this beautiful butterfly and fly off and sip the sweet nectar, as Swedenborg says, in some sort of a heaven with a new capability. I think of the difference between a caterpillar and a butterfly. Your mode of locomotion is just entirely different. And he says even in these humble things in nature, there's a picture of the kind of transformation that awaits us. So from a God's eye view, he's willing to have us go through some pudgy moments along the way, because where it's headed is glorious.
I like to think, too, that, like, God, as wisdom itself, knew, like you were saying, like, the nature of love is to give what it has to others and bless them from yourself and everything. And so God knows what it means to be truly happy is to have somebody who is freely choosing to be in a relationship with you, and so that is so he created humans to have that. But of course he knew the risk that he was taking to create free people who would then completely forget what love really is, where wisdom really comes from, all these things. And so, but rather than from the sort of deistic or whatever perspective of like, all right, see if you can climb to the top here or whatever. It's just this, he took care that knew exactly what he was getting into to, like, he made it so that our very suffering, like the worst places we get ourselves into, could be the catalyst to leverage us into heaven, like in a heavenly direction eventually, so that a friend recently quoted to me, I think it's Thich Nhat Hanh, who says that they would never wish for somebody to be free of suffering because suffering is the clearest path to compassion, and compassion is our salvation.
Yeah, that's a good quote. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I will take your turn for
Thank
one
you.
because I already took like 3 turns in a row. But
I'm glad to be listening to you guys talk.
Okay.
That's what I'm feeling.
okay. Good. Well, nice of you to say so anyway. Okay, so I want to say I don't think it was like God is sitting there and saying, I'm going to make Curtis, and you know how what would be really good for Curtis is I'm going to make him go through all these miserable things, and
Yes.
then he's going
Right.
to be happy.
Yes.
But I think that
Right.
you can't fake actual freedom, that we're actually
Right.
in a place where you can
Right.
really do things.
Right.
That I can really do things that have a real impact. That leads to, because you said you're like, when you get really inside, you're deep, you're meant to, but then you want to go accomplish something. And to know like the true joy of accomplishment. We watch the fan video. He's saying this and this
Yes.
really happened, and
Right.
he said thanks you guys for what we're doing. To think we helped make it happen. Maybe that's a specific kind of joy that you can't get outside of, like, okay, we're going live here, and that condition of, okay, you can really do things and there really is choice, that overall in the end leads to this, to be in a heaven that's real. It's got to be the best case scenario for a conscious being, and that's why it's still the best thing to do, even though there's all these side effects that in the end you get so much money, spiritual money at the end of it, that it's like, yeah, it was worth all that work that we put in or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we can, this is a big question, so
Yeah.
you're taking the rest of the show on it. I don't know. No, but I was just reading, and I know it mentions it in a few places, but like Jesus talks about treasure in heaven, like this whole, and it's easy to sort of fly over that, like, oh yeah, sure, like I'll make some money, I'll get my interest back, whatever.
Yeah.
But like, I like that as a reminder that there really is this whole existence, the butterfly existence that is awaiting us, so that the tragedy that we see here, the why all this is, we're seeing under the clouds, like we are just,
Yeah.
and this is not all of the picture, and so that this isn't the end game, and that there is these setting up for yourselves treasures in heaven is really that power of choice to use this gift that we have in this life and struggle against these things or whatever, that really is going to lead to a transformation.
Yeah.
I did just have a quick thought about Chelsea talking about suffering leading to compassion.
Yeah.
And I just have seen so much in my own little life and the own little people that I know, that it's the pain that people go through that allows them to be so useful for other people. You know what I mean? I mean, like, it's your own struggles that give you some kind of depth that you can offer to someone else when they're going through it. I don't know. It just seems like that's one of those detours to heaven.
Yeah.
If heaven is a
nothing
kingdom
quite
of
like it.
uses,
Right.
then we find our use often by our own, the things that we've
Struggled with.
brought
right,
to
right.
been brought to our knees about.
All right. That's awesome. Let's leave it on that. So, of course, yeah, we could do several shows about this, but we'll leave it there and see what the next question is. So, this is from Nagelpunk. Is it possible from a Swedenborgian perspective that we all may be creating our own heaven and hell through our own beliefs and experiences that we adhere to in this life? I would say you can certainly create your own hell. And I don't know, is heaven more of an objective thing because it's true? I'm
Right.
thinking of, we did this animation once of the story of the guys who are in this little hut in hell and they love money. This is Swedenborg reporting this from the spiritual world, and they all gather around these little bits of gold and imagine that it's more gold, and they're allowed to imagine that they own it all, but they can't take it from everyone. And so, is that something you? It's semantics, right? Do we create it or not? But I think there's elements of yes and no. So I want to hear what you guys have to say about the whole thing.
There's that thing that we create our own reality, right? I mean, there's that saying.
Yeah.
We're all creating our own reality.
Yeah, I think what doesn't... Swedenborg gives me the idea that a lot of people who go to the other world... he says that a lot of people are mistaken about their own spiritual condition. A lot of people who are good think they're bad, and a lot of people who are bad think they're good. And he says there's reasons why on both sides. It's important to be mistaken about yourself. And so sometimes I've thought that in a way, everybody's kind of surprised by their outcome. You know, and especially heaven, I think, is a surprisingly good, very moving sort of. I'd given up hope. I didn't think this was possible, but, you know, this amazing thing is happening. And so it is absolutely created through our choices, through the things that we love, through our beliefs and experiences and all that kind of thing, and the way we react to what's the input that's coming in all the time. But I don't think it's a conscious that we are creating. I think once you know a little bit about heaven and hell, you can try to create that some more. It should be about loving the Lord, loving the neighbor more than materialism or selfishness or what, you know, that kind of thing. So you can try to go for that. But I think it is something, even hell, here's a heresy. I haven't said a heresy for several minutes. I think even God does not create hell, but Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you. And I think even in hell, the Lord is creating a circumstance that's optimal for that person, you know. And so I think of the Lord as creating something in accord with our own deepest desires and intentions and wishes. So our behavior is creating that, and we recognize our home when we see it. But I don't know that we're consciously going, oh yeah, I knew it. You know, like that song that says, my heaven will be a big heaven and I will walk through the front door. You know, I don't think that's the experience of going.
Sorry, what's that song? I don't think I've heard it.
Yeah, I think that makes me think of how Swedenborg says that the paths to heaven are all over the place, right? Like just the way that the Lord leads a person is super mysterious or whatever.
Nobody knows. Right.
And I think from a Swedenborgian framework, that heaven and hell are real things, and then we are either aligning ourselves with heaven or hell or the unique flavor that suits us or something. And yet at the same time, we are forms of goodness and truth, and then we have the choice, like we are unique creations in God, and so we are a unique combination of love and wisdom, and so if we want to turn away from God, we will be a very unique addition to hell of evil. So in that way, we are our own. I mean, he says each person is a miniature heaven or a miniature hell.
Right.
So in that way, we certainly are.
Yes,
we are creating ourselves. So you can either create the heaven that is you in God or the hell that is you apart from God. And
it's not based on anything outside of yourself.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like in terms of creating your own heaven or hell, it's from what's in your heart and mind. That's what. Yeah. It's not like somebody has a box and you just stick these people in that box and those people.
Right.
In that box.
Exactly. It's like in so many ways, I feel like that's what Swedenborg says. That is, it sort of flips the way that we would think about it, the appearance of it or something, and I think of how like Swedenborg. Oh, there was one other part that I was going to say. Somebody else say something.
Okay,
come back to me.
I drove it from your mind. I apologize.
Right.
So we are gathered here today. I don't think anybody is intentionally masterminding their own heaven or hell. Meaning, okay, I know there's going to be a hill, and okay, go ahead.
Oh no!
There's going to be a hill. All right, I'll finish that. There's going to be a hill and a tree, and I want a slate roof. You know, I don't think it's like that.
Exactly.
I said in the beginning you can create your own hell because I think of these stories that Swedenborg tells of people who had latched on to particular false beliefs. And I think that there's some implication of that through our own belief and experiences we adhere to in this life.
Right.
That you can latch on to these certain beliefs or ways of being, and if you don't let those go, that affects your hell, but not in ways that you anticipate or create. And if you talk to anybody in heaven and say, did you make this? You're like, no, I didn't make this. I mean, heaven is the process of acknowledging that God is the one that does things, and heaven is goodness and truth. So I don't think anybody is sitting there like in Super Mario Maker making like, here's a mushroom here, here's a block here. Have you guys played Super Mario Maker?
Minecraft, I think.
Yeah, Minecraft. Yeah, that's probably a better example.
You're dating yourself.
So nobody's Minecrafting their heaven or hell. And nobody in heaven would say, I made this when I was in the world, even though it's the steps that God has taken us through in the world that allow us to have this heaven. So it certainly matters the life we live.
And it's very unique to who we are.
Yeah, it's exactly unique, but it's not like you better get on imaning and adhering to the right beliefs to make the coolest heaven.
Or you might be missing a bathroom when you get there.
That's right. Right, with a skylight.
So, like, I'm really working on my outdoor shower right now. Anyway, but
I don't know plumbing, but
I don't know plumbing, but I'm really hoping this works out. I was thinking, I think you pretty much said it, but the one other part that I was thinking of saying is just that the idea of our own beliefs and experiences that we adhere to just has that quality of, like self-sufficiency or something. When I feel like that whole, even the good things, the things that I think are good for me in my life that I'm believing about myself, I have to surrender those to God too.
Right.
Like that us connecting to God and becoming ourselves is this emptying out of our own beliefs, kind of, in a way. I don't. It's like hard to talk about because it is.
Sometimes I've seen this in my own life where the thing that you might think is the best about you, is actually problematic and something you need to work on. Right.
Yeah.
You're talking about my country album. All right. Okay. Do we want to say anything more about this? I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Let's do it. All right. This last one is from Latanya. Does Swedenborg speak of having access to the kingdom of heaven while here on earth? I would say he talks about that quite often, and he seemed to have sort of a backstage pass into the whole thing, right? So let's talk about what that means, and what Swedenborg said about the whole thing.
Did we do a show? Is it called Creating Heaven on Earth? What did we make that show?
How to create heaven on earth?
How to create heaven on earth.
Yeah.
I think that's a show very much about this idea of accessing the kingdom of heaven and making that here on earth.
Yes.
And something I remember from that is that, like, Swedenborg doesn't often directly tell us to do things, sort of himself. He's always saying, sure, follow the commandments, do these things that the Bible tells you to do. But, I mean, and this is something the Bible says, but just like pray that God's kingdom will come. Like,
I read the question differently. I see. You're right, but I thought it's like, does Swedenborg speak of having access, like of himself having access to the kingdom of heaven while he's on earth? And I was thinking about his travels.
Maybe so.
No, but I think this. She means it that way because that's like a more emotionally satisfying answer. So anyway,
we can.
So let's talk about that. So how are we accessing kingdom of heaven while we're on earth?
Yeah, on the one hand, Swedenborg says in some passages, and particularly in some letters that he wrote and things, that it can be dangerous to access heaven before you're ready for it while you're here in this world. Like you can get hooked up with who you think are angels, but they're evil spirits and they're misleading you or something like that. So he talks about the danger, what I think of as sort of the Ouija board approach or something, that there are dangers. And yet, at the same time, the whole purpose of what he's doing is to bring heaven and earth closer together. That vision at the end of the book of Revelation, the holy city, New Jerusalem, descending from God out of heaven, coming down into this world. And, that's what we're all doing here. I think that's the way the arc of history is going. And so he generally talks about that we're here in this world, then we die and we go to what's called the world of spirits, which is sort of a clearinghouse between heaven and hell where we get sort of worked out and boiled down to our least essence, not literally, but, go
See
through
our
process.
show, The World of Spirits.
Thank you. And then you go to heaven after that. But he does indicate in some passages that it's possible for us to go through the world of spirits while we're here in this world, and that it's certainly possible. In fact, it was designed. He says human beings were designed to be able to have contact with angels while they're alive in this world. And if your thoughts and feelings are of a heavenly nature, angels will be happy to communicate with you. We shut ourselves off by being overly materialistic or sensory oriented or lost in fallacies in our thinking or craziness or whatever. But that heaven is longing to have that contact with us. So it is possible. Swedenborg did have that kind of access And he even talks in his Journal of Dreams about the council of the palace. He saw this palace and he wanted to have a room there. And then later he was allowed in. And it seems like when he was transitioning over to getting his digs in heaven. But I think a lot of people think that Swedenborg was suggesting that he was the only one who could have the kind of experiences that he had. And I'm sure he's unique. But the whole point is for something more heavenly to be happening here. Mm-hmm. His picture in True Christianity 508 of this Nunc Licet temple, it's called, this temple that portrays this idea of this coming religious era, has as its center a sanctuary that he says represents the connection that people on earth will have with angels in heaven. Mm-hmm. And it'll be through Scripture. And, so this is something we're working toward, to be more heavenly and to have this kind of access while we're here. I think the way we're designed is to be able to be led by that. Joel chapter 2 talks about the Lord pouring his Spirit out on all people in the future, and nobody will need to check with somebody else to learn about God, because they'll all have this thing flowing in from inside. So I think this is a beautiful goal to go for, to have access, but we're the ones who are sort of blocking the relationship now. We need to do some work on our side.
Yeah, absolutely.
My thought is that, like we were talking earlier, if heaven is the union of goodness and truth, the union of love and wisdom, then any time that our wisdom is aligned with our love, if we know that, if it's true that, hurting somebody is bad, and we're not doing that, that's access to the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
It's just getting some truth and put into our life in a loving way. That's heaven.
Yeah. I've never had like a major spiritual experience. I don't claim any connection with heaven, but I feel like I get little connections with heaven all the time. Like I'll be thinking about some problem, something I've been thinking about for a long time and thinking negatively about, and I'll just suddenly get this thought. There's a different perspective on it, and I at this point in my life, I think like that's got to be heaven, because I never have thought that, and I've been like ruminating on this for a long time.
Working at it, I agree.
Or there'd be like a time, like just recently, I was cleaning the counters in our kitchen, and I was like, this feels awesome. Something feels good right now, and to me, I'm thinking, well, that's, I'm like, my antenna's still real fuzzy, but I'm tuning a little. I can just barely hear a little bit of heaven through there. I don't know. It seems that the more that I live, and some of the hard things that I've been through, like the times when I was not feeling any heaven, have kind of made me a little more sensitive to like, something good is here. And I know that it doesn't have to always be there. So it makes me think, like, oh, something's there. There's some heaven there. So I would say I totally agree that we're getting little bits of kingdom of heaven. And then, as you were saying, it's going to hopefully amp up, and we'll be in a future where that's like the norm,
This reminded me of another scripture of where there's a river, I think, that comes out from an altar in one of these prophecies. Yeah. I forget where it is. And then they go out and they measure, and it's up to your ankles.
Yeah,
then they
Ezekiel,
go out
right?
and it measures. I think so, right? That's right. I think it's the end of Ezekiel. And then they, it's up to your waist, and then it's so deep you have to swim in it. And I think that's a beautiful picture of how you'd have these little. Now heaven is just up to your ankle. Just get your toes wet now and then. Yeah. But there may be someday that we're swimming in it.
So Swedenborg, that Nunc Licet temple that you were mentioning, like he says that's like the defining difference of this new church, that we have, right? And the Nunc Licet, whatever the rest of the phrase is now it is permitted to enter with understanding into the mysteries of faith.
That's right.
And like a part of me feels like it wasn't too long ago, 2,000 years ago and a bunch more, where people were having very direct contact with angels, like getting confronted by them left and right and being told things and everything. And so you wonder, like, and according to Swedenborg, that was the lowest point of humanity. So they were in the worst spiritual state, and yet they had these, some of them at least, were seeing angels very clearly, being told very clear divine revelations, and that, so like, what are we missing? Like, how are we somehow in a better state, but I kind of feel like that entering with understanding into the mysteries of faith is this deeper knowledge, and then developing perception of that inner connection that we have with heaven. Like maybe that's I'm just like wondering out loud, but like maybe that's more of what it is. And maybe that grows into a sense of that angelic community that you're in or something, but just that you know, that it feels more genuine that way, that you're not just sort of, because people can have visions of angels and stuff, and like Swedenborg says, you can just toss it. You can be like, oh, well, I just made that up, didn't I? You know, but if you're really growing into this sort of confirming sense of a perception. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a question.
The council agrees.
So with Swedenborg and his growing access to the kingdom of heaven while here on earth, like my sense, although I'm just realizing I don't actually know, but he his first early, well, I guess when he was a child, he said he saw, there's records that he saw spirits or talked to spirits or angels, spoke with angels in a garden. Okay, so there was childhood stuff.
Right.
But then in his adult life, was it that he sort of, you know, he had evil spirits talking to him, or like struggled with his own demons? Like, was there any more of a presence of evil spirits? I mean, and then I know he had that experience of feeling like he had a connection or like a direct experience with God, but then like, is there any progression of like, oh, and this is when the angels started talking, or spirits from the spiritual world? Like, is there any sort of...
There was a very, very big sense of progression. Like, he has this work that's been titled The Word Explained, that he didn't publish himself, and where he has sort of, and also in his spiritual experiences, there's one list of sort of like the 10 early warning signs that you're having a spiritual awakening. And he talks about them and how he didn't realize what was going on. And he talks in The Word Explained quite a bit in what
That's
are called...
That's a good episode. We should make that an episode.
I know.
That would be cool. The indented paragraphs of where he talks about, well, there are 5 kinds. And I've had this number 1 all the time, and number 2 a little bit, and number 3 a little, and then occasion, and he hasn't hit number 5 yet at that point. And then later he writes in the margin of one of his manuscripts, a change of state in me into the heavenly kingdom in an image, August 7th, 1747. Right. I'm not making this up. He says it right there, you know, that he can tell you when he went to another level, you know. So there was a very progressive kind of feeling about it.
So it's interesting just thinking of that there is this, that's cool, a kind of progressive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he got more and more into, you know, being able to see higher heavens and being, you know, like, it was definitely progressive.
Now that partly has to do with our state, like we might have to, cool.
Right.
All right.
Right.
I liked when you said earlier, I'm just wondering out loud. I feel like that's a good note for us to close on. Thank you all for wondering out loud with me.
Yes.
Thank you everyone at home for like wondering out loud with us. We're going to be back next week. We're going to talk about the book of Revelation, and there's letters getting sent out to these churches. And there's this little, when we talked about what a church is, and these little like warnings, and what does it all mean?
What are these 7 churches?
Yeah, so we're going to dig into that next week. We hope you can all join us. Thanks again to you guys for hanging out. And we'll see all of you next week.
Bye.
Oh, wait. Did we go yet?
Like and subscribe.
Hey, did you guys leave when I said goodbye? Like and subscribe. Because if you don't, there won't be a channel by next week. YouTube will eat us alive. Just kidding. YouTube has been very good to us. Please like and subscribe. And if you want to support this programming, you can consider making a donation. Here's a little bit about our philosophy. We're a nonprofit, and here's how we approach the whole thing.
We want the ideas and insights we cover to be available for free to anyone, anytime they need them. That's why we offer Swedenborg's books as free downloads on Swedenborg.com, and we produce this show and other content on our Off the Left Eye YouTube channel with no paywall or ads. The only way to keep this up, though, is for those of you who like what we're doing and feel comfortable giving, to give. If the idea of helping others have easy access to the content we produce feels meaningful to you, please consider supporting this cause with a donation. Give if you can, receive if you need. If we cycle through this way, in the end, everybody wins.
I don't know who was reading that, but they sounded great, whoever they were. Okay, thanks to our panel. Thanks to everyone at home. Don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, we'll see you next week. We're going to talk about the letters in Revelation and what they mean for all of our own individual lives. So see you then.